so to speak.
Right. The people we have as our on-call employees usually have been folks that have been with the Public Authority Referral Registry for a while, have shown that they're reliable, and we try to keep a balance of language capacity and other issues to meet the needs of folks who call in. But as Louise said, a couple years ago, there really got put in place a program that's really helped that, and Marie and other people in the community were pivotal in approaching then the Department of Human Services and pushing for funding that allowed for new positions in that department, social workers who specifically dealt with discharge planning. And I don't know, Marie, if you'd want to give more detail about that a little bit.
Please do, yeah.
Okay. I think, as they were mentioning that when it's time for someone to leave the hospital, it often is a very traumatic time, and people may not have had experience with home care or the services they need. And so how do you make that connection? And in those days, it was that people would be, they'd be told that they couldn't get home care, assessed for home care until they were already home for a while, but then they couldn't go home unless they had the home care. So the program,
Catch-22, yeah.
That's right. So the program they mentioned actually started in San Francisco, but now has become more the statewide standard, which is that people can get those assessments in a hospital or in a nursing home, and the home care can be put in place and paid for.
Are those assessments done by the public authority social workers that Donna mentioned, or is there a variety of people across the city who can?
There's a separation of function, and the social workers who do the eligibility and assessment for IHSS are now in the Department of Aging and Adult Services.
Okay.
And so, no, we don't do the actual assessment, but once the assessment is there and people need the worker, we provide the referral lists and support to keep that independent provider mode of consumer and worker relationship together.
Now, in addition to on a post-discharge program, what happens in the case of an earthquake or a fire or some other kind of natural disaster that may occur in San Francisco?
Well, we know that something will happen at some point, and the public authority is in touch with disaster preparedness plans in the city. But I do have to say it will be a little difficult to really respond, because Marie mentioned earlier that when we first started talking about the public authority being set up, there were 4,000 to 6,000 people being served by the program. Today, I just looked at statistics that it's over 16,000 people in San Francisco, and they are served by about 14,000 workers. Now, you've got a situation where there's not a centralized location for those workers. They're in their own neighborhoods potentially, and so on. And so there are a lot of hurdles, but we will be working with people to try to put as much of a system in place as we can. We do encourage all consumers to get themselves on lists that are kept, I believe, with the fire department, so that the fire department is aware of where people with disabilities live, especially if they would be isolated, where if an elevator didn't work or would be stranded without assistance, so that the city could become aware of it, and to the degree we can get folks there, we would plan it.
Has there been any kind of real-life, localized emergency that has allowed the planning to be implemented to see how that works, or are we, at this stage, are we still crossing our fingers and hoping it doesn't happen, but if it does, there's a plan in place to try and you know, deal as well as we can?
Well, with the Katrina disasters, each city, and especially San Francisco, has focused and revisited their emergency preparedness plans. And I think especially the disabled community, after some of the horror stories of the Katrina disaster, has looked at the city and to make sure that those plans are in place to serve the needs of people with disabilities. To make sure that the emergency responders, when they assess people with disabilities or elderly people, take some of the things that they need, basic things, such as a wheelchair, such as their, you know, animal companion that is a service animal. You know, in the Katrina disaster, those things were left behind, and people that needed the use of a wheelchair, for example, were taken with other wheelchairs and dumped in an area where they couldn't move and they couldn't move. So they were, So there was some education involved, but not just education, but also preparedness by both the responders, but also by the disabled and elderly communities themselves to be prepared to be able to respond.
Well, Paul had mentioned in an earlier segment that as part of the training for the registry members was emergency services, emergency responding and first aid and that kind of thing. Is that something that all registry members eventually learn, or as they become part of the registry or remain on it?
Well, as I said, I think earlier, this is a growing component of the public authority, our training program, and until now it was a voluntary training, but in the next few months we hope that every worker coming through our registry will be required to go at least to the basic training, which will include the first aid, CPR, some personal care, and some other basic skills.
Well, is that again an example, Donna, of San Francisco on the cutting edge, or is that kind of now a standard protocol for public authorities across California?
Well, I think the whole program of IHSS is unusual and rather unique as to how it operates in California. And as far as San Francisco itself necessarily being ahead of the rest of the state in this area, I can't really say that in this situation. I did want to follow up though and say that because one of the uniquenesses of in-home supportive services is that public dollars can be used to pay for family members to take care of people.
Okay.
So about half of the 16,000 I referred to, hopefully a family has an emergency plan worked out.
Right.
And I wanted to highlight too, although as I say, it's with the kind of not central working place in this program, obviously, and scattered nature, it becomes hard to plan emergency response. But so many of these home care workers are really devoted to their consumers, and I'm sure in an emergency situation, part of their training will be, and we would support them, and they as individuals, I'm sure will do everything they can to be sure that whoever their consumer is assisted.
That's great. Well, thank you for joining us for this segment of the Better Care Forum discussion. Please stay with us for a further discussion of the same important issues. And I was thinking, actually, in some ways, welcome back to the Better Care Forum discussion with our guests Marie, Donna, and Luis. And I wanted to follow up on some statistics I found kind of interesting. The ones you mentioned, there's 16,000 recipients of Think of Public Authority supportive services and 14,000 people helping provide those services. It sounds like it could be a very expensive proposition to have the public authority and to perhaps fund some of the expansions that I imagine are necessary. Is this an effective use of taxpayer money, or would we be better off with some other model?
Well, of course, I'm biased and proud to be working in a model that to me is very cost effective. I think people should understand it is a high cost program because over 350,000 people around the state on any given day receive IHSS. So as Marie mentioned, as the wages went up, there's a lot of growth in this program because the need is out there. But as people can also understand, it's also individualized. So there are people who might receive only 6-10 hours a week of service.
Okay.
There are some people who could receive the maximum of 283 hours a month of service. So there is a cap on the maximum of number of hours of assistance that people can get. But overall, when you aggregate or bring all those costs together, the average cost per month of IHSS is about $1,500 a month per consumer, whereas a regular nursing facility in the community is probably about $30,000 a year. Right. And then in San Francisco, with issues around the city and county owning the largest nursing facility itself in the United States, it gets twice what a regular nursing facility gets per day per person. And so in Laguna Honda, it's almost $400 per person per day. Now, of course, they are getting housing and meals out there and so on, but even if you account for that, and even with the housing market in San Francisco, there's a lot of difference between $1,500 a month and, well, let's multiply out $400 times 30 days.
I won't make you do it on
month.
air, but
Yeah.
well, Marie, do you think there's an increasing recognition that this is a cost-effective way to go, or is there still a struggle to sort of make that message known on a local or national level?
You know, I think the IHSS Public Authority and the other groups like the IHSS Consortium and the Task Force have done a lot to raise the visibility of the issue and the importance of really addressing it into the future. And I think there is some broad consensus that nobody should be in a nursing home who doesn't belong there. And if you can provide those services in the community, you should do that. So IHSS is the critical piece of that. But it may not be all. You know, people get a range of services in a nursing home, but you can get those same services through an adult day health program. You can get case management, you can get a whole array of services in your own home. So the goal, I think, has been to move as many people out to the community and to intervene so folks don't end up in nursing homes.
Well, I know bureaucracies can be slow to change, and I'm curious if the funding mechanisms, do the governments, do they prefer to pay a nursing home, or do they prefer to use sort of more individualized programs like public authorities?
Well, historically and even currently, there's been a bias to fund nursing homes, and that's something that around the country is hoping to change, and that has been changing slowly in the last few years, especially with the Olmsted decision that says that you need to provide equal services in the community. There's an interesting concept that says money follows the consumer, and that means that a consumer that is in a nursing home going into the community, that cost, or almost all the cost that takes to care for that person in the nursing home, follows that consumer into the community to pay all the services, the array of services, home care, housing, and all the other health center, all the things. So the interesting part about that still that's not a concept implemented in California, but in some states are already implementing that. And the interesting part is that once you move that money out of the nursing home into the community, you don't fill that nursing home bed again. So you keep people in the community, and more funding goes into the community. So that's hopefully that's where California and other states around this country will follow.
Are there any statistics on not just the cost of the program itself, but the fact that by allowing people to live in their homes independently reduces health care costs, and people don't end up in hospitals as often, and that kind of sort of invisible but yet very important savings?
Well, unfortunately, it is invisible in the sense that it's very hard to statistically show what doesn't happen, you know. But I think there are studies that over long periods of time show that home care is more cost effective. And if you even delay going into a nursing facility a couple of months, you've saved a lot of money. Or if you keep someone from having to go to an emergency room, or have a lot of the discharge happens on Friday afternoon. If they don't go back into the hospital on Monday because a home care worker and other support services were there, it saves a lot of money.
That's fantastic. Thank you for joining us for this evening's Better Care Forum discussion of how people with severe disabilities can live in their communities. We are looking forward to having you with us in future episodes as a Better Care Forum explores further strategies for success and independent living. And I want to thank you guys.